Danielea Castell, and I am your host. And on this Zoomcast, which takes place on the last Thursday of the month, we are here to hear about the magical stories and the adventures that happen with people who have personal dialogues and relationships with who we call nature elders. And so these are the elder ones, the wise ones, and they can be in the form of trees, waters, or mountains and rocks. So here today with me, I have Juliet Duff, and she is from Cork, well, presently living in Cork, Ireland. And Juliet is an herbalist. And as we've been preparing for our time here today, I've been learning the most fascinating things about Juliet. And as I get to know people better who participate in the listening field, and that is where we met, I realized that we always introduce ourselves in the listening field by our name and where we live on Mother Earth, and then we bring in the nature elders that we're bonded with, but we don't actually know kind of what we do for a living or what our training is, etc. So it's just been extraordinary to get to know more about Juliet, who has lived in many countries across the world, studied with many different kinds of people, learning to see the world through their eyes, and eventually became trained as an herbalist. And of course, as you can imagine, has beautiful relationships with plants and trees and water. And this this year, she had an opportunity to really begin her relationship with rock and stone people. So welcome, Juliet.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I wondered if you wanted to just share a little bit about what your early life was like for you. What I've learned is that nature was calling you from a very, very early age.
Yeah, actually, as early as I think I was probably 2 or 3, I remember there was a hedge around our house. It was in an urban setting, and I used to just crawl under and spend all day just in the hedge, just communing there and enjoying myself. And then later on we moved to another house, and it was across the street from a big bush, very large area of bushes, and so I'd spend a lot of my time there making forts and just hanging out in the bushes. And then actually and then from there I moved to Quebec, and my father, of course, didn't approve of thinking that I was communicating with fairies, told me there was no such thing as. And when I lived in Quebec, a friend, Denis Lafrance, was doing anthroposophic agriculture, and he was turning over a very barren land that they bought for peanuts because they were told it was up in the north that they couldn't grow anything, and they were a bit like Fintorn. They were growing these enormous vegetables, and he said absolutely they are nature spirits they were working with. And then I worked many years at Outward Bound School and the Wilderness School, and often did fasting and solos in the woods for days at a time, and spent a lot of time canoeing and walking and taking groups, of course, out and rock climbing and things, and various expeditions.
I'd like you to share a little bit more about the distinction that you were told exists between what we might call stone elders and rock elders.
Yeah, I spent the March, April, May in Italy and Greece, going around, and those were all stone places. And I got the message that they were really needing now in this time, 2022. And I asked how I could serve or what I could do, especially around, they said it was a time really that all this old historic, all the violence, all the suffering, all the stories, all the love, all the devotion, everything that was stored for so long in those areas now could be freed and released back into the oneness, because they were all stuck in separation consciousness. And this was the time that we could come into unity consciousness, and they could be freed and transmuted. All that kind of karmic, those karmic chains could be released to allow them to be freed back into our welcome home, and freed back into the oneness of the all. And that I could do that if I would offer my heart space and allow my heart to be used as a portal through which the creator or the universal self, whatever you want to call it, could access through my heart portal, and I could welcome them in, and then they could, and transmute with the violet fire and things, and then it was a process. It could start now because it was time.
And so you said yes. You said yes. You were open
Yeah,
to
very
that
much.
task. Absolutely. You
Yeah.
said enthusiastically. And then later on, of course, you met the Rock Elders in Cappadocia in Turkey. And then when you returned home to Ireland, you now had a communication line to the rock people, but also discovered one day that the ruins that are on the property where you live, they spoke to you. And what did they tell you?
Yeah, I was referring to the rock elders as stone elders, and I got this very strong message when I was in. There's a place in our tree land, patch kind of wild, that I go to usually daily to commune, and I have my trees and the water and all my relationships, the deva and etc. And we were just having a session, and suddenly I referred to the stone elders in Cappadocia, and I got this very strong reprimand that they are not stone. We are the stone people. We are the stone ancestors, and it was from all the ruins from around here, which is very, hard cut stone, as opposed to these were very earthy mounds, I suppose. And they made it quite clear that, in Italy, the Roman and Greek ruins and Irish ruins of castles and things, those are all stone, but those are rock. So please, yeah, please differentiate.
I love that. And it just again reminds us how important it is to ask these nature elders when we meet them, how would you like us to address you or call you? Because it gives them an opportunity to educate us. So, yeah, thank you for just making that distinction right off the top. I wanted to say that I became aware that Juliet had communed and received messages from the Stone Elders during one of the listening fields that happened leading up to Peace Week this year. And I actually looked back, and it was the listening field that we opened to connect with the consciousness of manifesting our full potential. It's the seventh core need. This was the message that you received, and I just found it really impactful for myself. For them, these ancient ones, yeah, who've seen so much, to just when we ask them, how can we ensure that all humans and animals have access to the conditions in which they can manifest their full potential? And then this is what the ancient stones said. You need enough of what your bodies require, so you are not focused on survival, nor so indulged that you go to sleep. Can you say a little bit more about what you heard, saw, felt when they gave you that message?
Yeah, it was because of all the suffering and trauma that has gone on throughout his history, from people in separation consciousness trying to get more and take power over and etc. And then they go to sleep in terms of consciousness, and everything falls apart. So very important to make sure everybody has what their body needs, but be very aware not to fall into the trap of this old separation consciousness of us and them, and trying to take from others what's not yours to take.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I'd like to take just a moment now before we go into the story itself and invite all of us to just close our eyes and just rest our awareness in our heart and think about and bring to mind the rock elders, the mountain people, the boulders, the bedrock elders. These are the great ones who form the upper mantle of Mother Earth. To bring those that you know to your heart now. And let's just take a moment to connect with them, acknowledge them, thank them And if there's anything they have to say back, we take a moment always to just listen. Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I was remembering Table Mountain and in Cape Town, and I was remembering the Bedrock Elders who I met earlier this year around with through the Sounds for Peace experience, and just really remembering that when I communed, heart to heart with them, and even just now, I felt this deep peace. I feel myself anchored in Mother Earth. I would say rooted. If I was a tree, I would feel, that rooting. But with our rock elders and relatives, they are just anchored. They are anchor, and I just so appreciate their embodiment of peace and stability. So thank you, everyone, for bringing this into our field together. And I want to show you a few pictures that Juliet has shared to me of the landscape that she's going to now talk about, just so you can have some idea of what this pilgrimage really entailed. Anything you want to share about this image, Juliet?
And just the soft and malleability of these rock elders, and how there are so many valleys that are carved, usually by rivers, by water that has gone through them. And walking was up and down these escarpments that you see, that's often from separates the valleys. And in many of these rocks, you can't see them very well, but you come across just these little holes in them, and you find that they're doorways, that they've been dwellings, they've been churches, they've been, you can see a few on the right there. Extraordinary that through the centuries, millennia, these were home to many people. I mean, extraordinary uh, structures that were all just appeared, and again, just these escarpments that show the very verticalness of as well of this land.
And what would it be, wind that would have, or water that went in between that would have sculpted these kind of spires?
I don't know. I would say weather of, yeah, wind and water are the obvious ones.
So now that we've set the stage for where you were, and so this is Turkey, in north, south, east, west of in Turkey, which quadrant?
Central, kind of
Central.
central, just below Ankara.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about, yeah, how that journey began. Because I understand that you actually had an invitation to go on horseback with a group, but heard some guidance, different guidance, and you decided to listen. So take us through what happened.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, we had friends from Kenya who came through, and they'd just been on. They actually ran riding safaris in Kenya. We had horses in Kenya. We used to ride a lot with them, and they told Fergal about this fantastic riding safari, and he's been thinking about it and saying, "Oh, we must do that. We must do that." And then I just thought this last year, well, if we're ever going to do it, I mean, he's 72 this year, and we don't ride normally at all anymore. So it's not like we're going to be getting more riding fit. So if we're going to try it, let's, why don't we do it? So we organized that back quite a few months ago. I guess it was probably in about February, March, we organized to do it in mid-September. And then extraordinarily in early June, kind of out of the blue. I had an accident falling off a stone wall I was climbing just at the bottom of our garden here down to, we have an old mill there and down by the river. And I was just climbing up it as I often do. And I fell off and hurt my shoulder and my hip. And I thought, I mean, it was kind of a weird accident. But anyways, my shoulder, my right shoulder, and my left hip got more and more sore until actually by August, we were in British Columbia. We were visiting, my sister was getting married and a lot of family were there, and we were up in the mountains, and I had a terrible limp. I could hardly walk. And my arm I couldn't use anymore. I had to keep it in a sling all the time, and both of them would be raging at night if I did much with them. So I couldn't sleep much. Anyways, I had an MRI that I phoned our GP and she said, get an MRI. And it showed that I had partially torn two tendons, two of the four tendons in the rotator cuff in my right shoulder. And two were partially torn, but one was a full depth tear and the other one was a partial tear. So they said, look, this is really serious. You'll need surgery because these never heal. And it's dangerous because if they tear completely, you'll need an emergency surgery and you won't be able to do it out there. So they said, absolutely no way could you ride. You have to be able to be strong with your hands with the horses. And I realized that. But then I thought, well, I'm not even able to walk. I mean, this is crazy. So we were thinking about canceling the whole thing. And just a couple of days before we were to fly at the end of August. And I went back to the woods because in fact, they were the ones when I asked them back in February, March, if it was a good idea to do this safari. I do muscle tests, kinesiology, and they said yes. So this time I was expecting them to say, yeah, cancel. And I said, well, what do you think? And they said, no, don't cancel. You should go. And I thought, oh, okay, I can't even walk. So we phoned them and said, look, I'm not going to be able to ride for sure. Can I do a bit of walking? But I only want to walk if I can go alone because I love to be alone in the wilderness. I don't want to be with guides or other people. If there's no human factor that would make it dangerous, then I definitely want to be alone. And to my surprise, they said yes. So I thought, okay, well, I can't walk yet, but let's see. So we got on the plane a couple of days later, and in the first 2 weeks, I had started doing some physio exercises, and I was doing them all of that time, those months, but without much relief. And suddenly they started to take hold. And within about 2 days before we were going to start the safari, I'd been limping up until then. I was suddenly pain-free, really. So that seemed extraordinary. And then at the beginning of the safari, and so there was a small group. I think there were 7 riders with my husband, and then and so we would move around and we would go to different places, and then they would just help me with logistics to take me, and then I would walk through the valleys and stuff in a different place. So I was completely alone, which I really wanted to be. And yeah, so my arm, I had slung up the whole time. I couldn't use my arm at all. It was really very, very sore. And in fact, I ran into we met 2 Italian radiologists, and they asked what was wrong with my shoulder. When I told them, they said, my goodness, if you were in Italy, you'd be on bed rest waiting for your surgery. And I thought, oh, maybe it's a bit crazy. But anyways, I won't think about it. So oftentimes when I was walking, because it entailed going up and down quite steep little goats trails, sometimes up and down escarpments, I had to keep my arm. And so I'd keep asking them, is this safe? Because if I can't fall on it. So if I'm, and I can't really use it to hold on to anything. So they would kind of guide me and tell me where to go. And so I was walking 5 to 7 hours every day up and down escarpments, and my hip was absolutely fine.
And so when you say ask them, you're talking about the landscape elders, the rock people, the beings that you were amongst. Yeah. And every time you felt that you didn't know where to go, you would ask them to guide you, and they would. Yeah. How does that happen for you, Juliet? Like when you say they guide them. So for some of us, we hear words. Others of us, it's like our body just orients towards that direction and we follow it. Kind of, how does it happen for you when you get guidance?
Well, I wasn't aware at all of rock elders or anything else. I just wanted to be walking in a very, wild place without people. And it, they kind of prepared me, because the first day I went off and I was just so happy that there were no people around and I could just be in the bush and etc. And I started, it's like information being transmitted.
Mm.
And I realized that because I was vulnerable with this arm, I realized that I didn't, my personality, I didn't want to be making decisions because I didn't know the terrain well. And, I could get up to an escarpment and find that I'm really stuck or something. So I realized I had to start asking for help. So it was a beginning like that. But then that same day, actually in the morning I went to some monasteries and was just kind of hanging out there in the afternoon on a very rigorous walk after lunch, and I hadn't felt hungry for lunch, but I just ate to be polite, really. Went on this walk and then felt very, very ill, like all of it was sitting like a huge lump in my belly. I got up to the top of the escarpment and it was very hot. It was about 33 degrees, I guess, and I was drinking lots of water, but I didn't feel well. So by the time I got back down and to the lodging that night, I just needed to go to bed. I felt terrible. And about 5 in the morning, I purged and it was all completely undigested. It was just like I needed to cleanse if I was going to do this for them. And I think they thought that I was agreeable because I was communicating already. And it was like, okay, well, these are the parameters, you need to cleanse, purify a little bit. So the next morning I knew got the message I was to fast all day. So I fasted the next day. And when I went to bed the next night, I got the message that the next day I'd be feeling really well and it was time to really go for it. So it's just a kind of transference, I'd say, of information, that I don't hear words. It's more a message. Messages come, and sometimes I might speak out loud and talk, but and also one thing that I found really interesting, because I do it quite a bit, but it was constant when I was in Cappadocia, was I found myself constantly chanting mantras or toning kind of light language all the time. Even when I was, I'd have to kind of keep my mouth shut when I was at the lodging and things, because it was like it was just constant flow coming through. And the thing that it suddenly struck me was I had lived in northern Kenya. I was running a medical clinic for the Samburu tribe in the Northern Frontier District. And one day some elders had come from across the mountains and asked if I would come with my medicines. They had a lot of sick children and they needed me to go. So I said I could come at the end when I closed up the clinic, and they would lead me over the mountain. So we with another friend who was one of the elders in the community, and it was a full moon night, and it was only when we were starting to go up over the mountains, and it was real rock climbing, so you needed handholds. And I suddenly remembered this was a place that was absolutely full, the home of puff adders. Now, puff adders are extremely poisonous snakes, and they're one of the very few snakes that don't get out of the way. And if you touch them, they'll strike. Most snakes will just skedaddle if they feel that you're coming, but puff adders never do. And and this was their home. So I suddenly realized when we were halfway up, and it was dark, and so you were just feeling for handholds. And so I said to the Boitung, what about puff adders? And he said, well, don't you hear the elders singing? And I said, yes. And he said, well, they're singing to keep us safe. They're singing to the gods because we're on a mercy mission, because we're doing, like this, that no snakes and nothing will hurt us, and they'll protect us. And their chanting went the whole evening. There was 3 of them, and it was a beautiful low chant. And I suddenly realized it was the same kind of sounds that I was making that were just kind of coming through me, that were very soothing and very comforting. as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I can't help but think about reciprocity, right? I can't help but think about, you're offering your voice, your heart, your love in that steady stream of sound is not only a connector, but it's a giving back for just being able to be there. And I just feel like it just, on a subtle level really feeds the relationship as well as might serve some very practical uses as well. So what happened next? Day three. This is day two up there, but it's day three of this 3 day segment.
And so then I went to this amazing monastery. Well, it was a huge monastery, and it was dated between I think 8th and 13th century. It was built and used. And it was supposed to be pouring with rain that day. So I decided, well, in the morning, I went up right up to right up through the valleys and up to the top of the escarpments. And actually, there were a lot of vineyards up there, and some pickers offered me all these grapes to eat. So I put them in. I had just kind of a shuk I carry around me, and I was just kind of eating from there and drinking water and going up to the top, came down and met the others for lunch. But I couldn't, the rest of the time, actually, I had no appetite. So I rarely ate anything. I would eat a little bit of soup. So I just ate the grapes that I'd been given because I couldn't face food yet. But I was still very, very full of energy and didn't feel tired or anything, but just had no hunger. So in the afternoon then, I went to there was a main cathedral there, and in the rock that was all painted and quite exquisite. And I just lay by the altar and asked, because in fact that was 21st of September, that was a day of peace and gratitude. So I asked on that day, what could I do, to serve them? And could they tell me their stories? And I just felt all these centuries of devotees, so much love, so much prayer, so much devotion that had been heard and experienced through those rocks, but at the same time, so much violence from the various empires, the Persians and the Ottomans and the Crusades, and I mean just so much violence and people having to and bloodshed, often massacred and stealing whatever they could from them, any gold they had. But they would often be, put big boulders over the mouths of their caves, so that they would have to go sometimes for a week until the marauders had taken what they wanted and then left, and they could come out again. So there was huge amounts of angst and stress and sadness, as well as devotion, incredible artistry and creativity. So it was actually just one more word about that, because during that week, as I said, I was walking very rigorously 5 to 7 hours a day, and I just didn't have any hunger, but I was so full of energy. And again, it brought me back. Again, when I first moved up to Samburu, I was living in a mud dung hut with a family, and they're pastoralists. So they were mainly, the food was milk, meat, and blood. And I was vegetarian, had been for a few decades, but knew that if I was going to be there, I'd have to drink blood and eat meat, because that's all there was. But the milk is a very strong smell. And I'd been told something about that there's often cow's urine and stuff put into it to help with the coagulation, I don't know, and digestion and stuff. Anyways, I found that and I was never a milk drinker. I found that the milk was really hard to take. And after about a couple of weeks there, my body physically would not allow any of this stuff to go into I would retch if I brought it this close to me. And there was nothing, there's when they live on milk, and then when they slaughter, there'll be meat and blood, but then there's no milk. So it's either the milk when you have those times. So I couldn't face it, and I felt terribly embarrassed because they were all very worried about me. But I had so much energy, and I went for about 5 or 6 days with nothing. And I don't even remember if I could have drunk much water, because the water was just, it wasn't from a very clean source. And so normally I would drink the chai, which they would make, but it would be so milky, it would smell of the milk. So I couldn't take the chai either. So it was basically little bits of water for 5 or 6 days. And I was out all day with the girls, herding the goats and sheep and calves and things. So would be gone from dawn until sunset. Didn't have any hunger. I was so full of energy. And this just reminded me of it. This, I did eat a little bit of soup and stuff, but again, I wondered of the human capacity to be able to bypass our digestive system at some point in our evolution, that this may be a possibility, because I experienced that again at this point, but I was taking a little bit in, but I very full of energy.
Do you think that what happened, the experience in Kenya, do you think it was the land? Do you think that you were receiving nourishment, energetic, but nourishment from the land? And similarly might have been the case in Cappadocia?
I think probably prana, because again, both times, you see, it was in many ways just like going up with the elders over to Seren, over the Ndotos. I was there kind of on a mission. I was there to learn about the language and culture so that I could serve them and run the clinic. But I wanted to know and understand and feel what their life was like before I could start to prescribe to them what they should be doing, or how to prevent certain things and how to treat them. So I felt very lighthearted, and I felt very, I just felt, I suppose, again, it was kind of purifying me. And again, after about whatever, 5, 6 days, I suddenly craved their milk, and I couldn't get enough of it. And all my hunger came back, and I loved the milk in whatever form I had. From then on, it was great. And I think it was prana. I think and sunshine, both in Turkey and in northern Kenya. There's a lot of sunshine and prana. And I think that it was that. And as you say, the land, the environment where, the energy.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let's just pause a moment, because there's just been a lot of very interesting information. So let's just take a minute here to breathe and let what we've heard drop in more deeply. What I'm coming away from when I hear this from you, it's just this sense that when we're aligned with Mother Earth, with our mission, we're there to serve and to learn. That one, we're supported, we're helped to prepare, and anything that isn't needed falls away naturally. And it almost seems as if we require less and we're able to give more. And I'm again equating to, what we're all looking at right now is that we've co-created a consumer-based society. We've also just woken up to the level of trauma that human beings are living with, from, and into, for all kinds of different reasons. But when you look at en masse, and then trauma invariably creates addiction. And addiction is like this hole that can never be filled, It doesn't matter how much we put in it, it can never be filled. And so I look at those two kind of, situations, the one where we need so little because we're aligned, we can give so much, and we have the energy to do it, and the other in which we're constantly needing to consume something in order to fill a hole that can never be filled. And we become a toxin ourselves on life, versus the gift that I think that we've been designed to be. So I think this is just a really, really important pause moment. I'm going to just share, go back to these for a minute, because we've heard a little bit about your movement in the story. So this is another just another image, and then Yeah, this, I think, Juliet, this an example? This would normally be a stream, but it was a dry riverbed, and this is how you traveled. Is that correct?
Yeah, Helen actually, they were an amazing couple who ran this horse safari. They're just fantastic, amazing people, very nomadic. And she was telling me when I was going through the valley, she said, what you do is pretend that you're a drop of water. So if you were a drop of water, where would you go? And that will be the path. So you go to the lowest point all the time, and then and that was an example of that. Sometimes there was water in the stream, and so there'd be a path just beside the stream, but always looking to keep to the low point.
And is this an example when you'd said that that was it that first day or the second day that you found the carved places where you actually started to receive transmissions? Is this an example of one of those?
No, the other ones were more elaborate. This was an example. I went, it was about the second last day, and I was walking down this valley and came across somebody. They told me that there was an old monastery there, and I couldn't get up because I couldn't use my hand. I couldn't climb up high enough to get up to the door to it, because you really needed to rock climb, and I couldn't afford to fall. So I just lay against, put my, vertically put my back against the wall, and just communed with them, and just asked them if, just spent time with them, and singing and chanting and etc., humming. And I just felt so at home, and I was so grateful. And then I suddenly thought, this is crazy. I'm really sorry. I don't want to be doubting, but could you possibly please give me a sign that this isn't just completely in my imagination, that there's, that you're responding to, that we're actually responding to one another. And then I had this message to look up, and right above me, quite low, just circling right above me, was an eagle. Well, what looked to me like an eagle. I'm not an expert, but because I grew up on the West Coast of in British Columbia, the eagle has always been an important part of my life. It was always it, and I hadn't seen an eagle since we'd been there. I hadn't looked for one, but I hadn't noticed one at all, and it just felt so reassuring to me to see this circling just above me, and I just thought this was exactly the sign I asked for. So I was lying, looking up with my head just kind of looking up at that ceiling, and then and my feet kind of, well, they were partially up the wall, so they were kind of on little ledges, but just it was a very special place. Yeah. These were the monasteries that I'd been in earlier. There were quite a few of these like this painted in these, and many of them are dated. Most of them, I'd say, are dated between the 9th and 13th century. And this was another example of some of the dwellings. I mean, there were whole villages that were carved in the rocks. It's extraordinary through the ages how they were dwellings for people.
Thank you so much. So to continue with your story.
Well, it was just, I suppose, every day it was different walks, and the message was very clear. I seemed to be getting, there was a methodology they were kind of making me aware of how to do this, and it was with tools that I'd learned already, but putting them all together. So it was calling home. The emphasis was calling home through the heart, calling us all back home to our oneness, and using the violet flame. The only way you can do this without feeling like a martyr, or feeling, oh my goodness, some of these were really did terrible deeds and bloodthirsty and awful. so the only way that you can that one can do this is to not focus on the human miscreations, on what they, as in, personalities did, but on the divine spark, and recognizing that it's the spark that needs to be let free, that they all had their stories, just like every one of us, and just like cells in our body. If we want to heal our cells in our body, we can't be punishing and judging. So the big step was non-judgment. Don't look at, don't think about all of the violence and the bloodshed and the bludgeoning and etc. But on these entities that are left trapped with this karma, or on the karma that's been embedded and trapped and needs to be released and left free, and to welcome them through my heart space as holy innocence, not buying into. Because if you buy into, if you even focus on or think about the wretchedness of the deeds that some of them had done, then you're buying into their separation, and you're actually fueling the karma that you're trying to be clearing. Just like if it's a cell in your body, you've got to see the beauty and purity. So it's very much a process of learning not to judge, not to hear the stories, actually to bypass the stories and realize that the stories are all out of separation consciousness, and that's what we're moving from. And if you get swept into that, you can do more harm than good. I mean, you're not. So it was just constantly to look at the divine spark of every life form, that all part of the divine, all, a tiny piece of one tiny aspect that each of us is. And we all have our stories, but not to dwell on that, and to just focus on the light, on the divine.
Beautiful. Beautiful. It reminds me just of something that I learned in 2018. All of a sudden, my telepathy with water went quiet, like really, really quiet. It was like the volume got turned from 10 down to 1. And I was like, I could barely hear. And I actually thought, oh, okay, I guess this, training, this 7-year training is over, right? It's done, because things just happen like that for me. It's just over. And it turned out that it wasn't, that apparently my soul had put this little stop in my path so that I would turn my attention to the waters inside my own body, because I've been pouring all this love and attention to the waters outside of me. And when I went in there, I discovered that I was still in separation from my human brothers and sisters. And so I was invited to pour this love that I was pouring to rivers and lakes into my own waters. And I had this miraculous healing, literally in a 2-second, right? It healed, incredible. And then I thought, oh, I wonder if I can, focus on the water in someone else and sort of have that same experience. And so what I did was I was connecting with my own waters, and then from my waters, I sent a thread of connection to someone else, to their waters, not to their personality, but to their waters. And there was only love. There was only love. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try it with someone else. So I tried it with someone else. Then I've had the same thing happen. I thought, well, I'm going to try it with someone that I don't get along with. And I chose someone who was in the public eye in the US of A at the time, someone I don't even say the person's name. And so I went water to water with this person, and there was only love. Like, if I go outside of that to their personality or what they were doing in politics, I mean, my brain wants to explode. That's why I don't think about them or talk about them. But when I go water to water, it's like, oh crap, there's only love. So, thank you for that. This focusing on the divine spark, focusing on that light. So before we open it up, we're going to open it up to questions and comments. And I know we've got people here who've got things to share with us as well. Let's go back. I had said to you, we started with this meme, the message that the ancient stone elders had given to you when you were in when you reconnected with them in the listening field. And so when I asked you, do the Rock Elders have a message for us? What did they say to you?
Yeah, they were. They first of all gave a full context to it, and then I said, and do you have a meme I could do in a few words to encapsulate all that?" And they said, "Yeah, but you have to give the context." But the meme would be something short and sweet: is what you feed your body, you feed the earth slash us. Now that's on every level. So they wanted to make it clear that this is very much an energetic thing, that love is what we need, and non-judgment is what we need, appreciation, gratitude is what we need to be feeding ourselves, so that we can thrive. And when we do that, the earth can thrive. She's also fed. Also, of course, being very careful of what we let into our bodies, emotionally, physically, mentally, what we watch, what we absorb through whatever senses, whether it be the mouth, the nose, the ears, the eyes. Trauma, that the trouble that she's having right now is inside, as you were saying. It's a reflection of what's going on inside within us. So to bring that back to that, because many people are, it is overwhelming, and you think, well, I can't do anything, so what can I do for the earth other than plant a few trees or eat my own garden, or etc. But in fact, the meme was, be aware of every thought you're fueling you're fueling the field with, you're fueling Mother Earth with, every thought, every feeling. Anything that's not forgiven, you need to use cosmic forgiveness now for everything. Stop judging, because it's breaking her. She can't. Well, she'll be fine without humans. That's not the problem. But if we want to be around with her and treat her with the awe and respect of our mother, we need to nurture her now and take care of her. And what to do that is really, as within, so without. So purifying our own bodies, purifying our minds and our emotional, energetic bodies, just with loving, with love, with unconditional love, basically.
Russell, you might be willing to say, that one picture that I was so intrigued with, and I was like, how were they formed? Do you have a sense? I know Shannon had put in like their fairy towers.
Yeah.
and they may be
Good.
too. Yeah.
Good description.
I did check a little bit into the geology of Cappadocia, and in that particular situation, primarily water erosion. What allows the very narrow the columns to form is that those little tops, sometimes faces, caps, whatever, is more resistant to erosion, and so those protect. So the most of the when you see and what was carved into where people put churches and homes is what's called ignimbrite, which is a kind of volcanic deposit that's a mixture of volcanic ash and bits of lava chunks and things like that. And it's quite susceptible to erosion and easy to carve into for humans. And so you have, it's that ease with which the rock can be eroded away that creates that very dramatic carved landscape, and then occasional layers that are more resistant to erosion that cap the plateaus around the edge, and yeah, so you can see that there's a darker color to the caps there, and then so yeah, that's mostly erosion, probably at this stage, possibly some wind erosion taking place as well. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Russell. Anyone else have either some questions for Juliet or some comments about the Rock Elders in Cappadocia? Or I know, Shannon, you put a link into the chat that there's actually an episode about it.
I I pay attention to the magic in ordinary moments that happen. I call it mom. And I just finished watching the series Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix while I'm trying to recover from food poisoning after coming back from Egypt. And so to have Danielea, thank you so much for bringing Juliet to my attention. The connection that you have with the rocks is profound, and I am deeply grateful that I'm here to witness that. The stones of Egypt didn't talk to me the way you were spoken to, and the rocks didn't speak all that much either, and maybe they did, but I didn't have the time to pay attention. And the ability, the space you were given to walk alone, I honor you, and I honored the people that you were under the care of, in the care of, so that you could make this walk. That's just so profound. We need to have the time and the space to listen to our elders. Danielea, you know, you've been doing that all your life, and I honor you for your voice, that you're willing to, I'm different and I love who I am. Yes, yes, and yes. I want to hear more of these things. We need to become courageous about what happens to us that is outside of the norm, the stuff that makes our souls sing, that lifts us out of the mundane and into the, oh, Mom, how wonderful you are. And be ready for the next thing that happens.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon.
I was just going to say also, the surprising thing was when I came back from Turkey, my arm was still nestling, very sore. My hip was fine, but I went to get another MRI because I thought that maybe my shoulder was even more damaged, because it was really quite painful if I used it. And this time the MRI didn't show any tear. So I thought, well, that's really interesting, because they had told me and assured me that this would not heal by itself. So I went to the surgeon. He said, well, maybe we don't need to do a surgery. Let's start with a cortisone injection. So I said, okay. So they did that, and some physio. And that might have been, it was probably about 10 days later, I was with the elders, and we were just doing our thing, having that kind of meeting. And suddenly they all started kind of giggling. There was all this kind of fun feeling coming up in the air. And they said, well, your shoulder and your hip now are going to be just fine. They've done what they needed to do. We had to incapacitate you so you could do this walk to be with the elders, because if you'd been on horseback in the group, you couldn't have had this experience. And so now it'll all clear up. And we had to show that there was a tear in it, because you're so stubborn that unless you'd seen it on an x-ray, you probably would have pushed your way through and just ridden anyways. But because it was torn on the x-ray, and all the doctors and everybody said, you can't possibly ride horses, it set you up. And then, the hip, there was another story for the hip, but it was okay to walk just before you went, because you needed to be doing the walking. And now that episode's finished, you don't need to worry about it. It's all gonna clear up. And I must say right now, I went to the physio yesterday and she just said, this is miraculous. You seem to be healed. I said, I thought that you'd be months and months and months, but she said, just keep doing what you're doing. So that was, I was kind of so perplexed when that came out, and it was clear that it was a whole cohort. I mean, all the nature elders, my trees here, the stream and the Pan and the Deva, they and the stone people here, and they were all in cahoots with that, and they just needed to tell me that it was okay now. The mission was complete.
That's so great. I just love it. You have to have conspire. You have to have a whole bunch of them conspire sometimes to get us to listen. We just have a minute or so left. Did you want to add something, Russell? And I wanted to see if Linda wanted to speak as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just want to express my deep gratitude, appreciation, Juliet. Truly inspiring. What you have shared is very much in accord with my own experience. Just a joy to be with you all. I've got a 4-generation household Thanksgiving celebration just about to start, so I will sign off promptly.
Yes.
Thank you, Russell.
I want to thank you, Danielea, for all you're doing. Thank you. It's fantastic. You're bringing all this up to the surface.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Linda, what would you like to add?
In a few seconds.
Yeah.
So I've been to Cappadocia's and myself, and I made a special pilgrimage there, but I wasn't conscious at that time. It was in 1969. And it was so I felt myself walking through those places, and it was very, very important. But I also realized that I just was not aware. I was very moved, but I had no level of consciousness like I have now. And so I thank you, Juliet, for taking me back to a place that did make a very big difference for me, but on a totally different level. And then I said the only question, because we don't have too much time, I have heard many people say, speaking of Mother Earth, she will be fine without us. And every time I hear that, I question that. I say, we have to look at that statement because that's part of the separation. And that's really, I'm just putting that out there because you people are receptive to share the understanding that is behind what that question is, what that inquiry is. I don't have the answers, but I have the inquiry. Unless Juliet has something, and Danielea has.
May I respond?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, to the first one, they made it very clear to me that it was because it was 2022. Now was the time. It hadn't been the time before this. Now was the time that needed and that's why it was all happening. In terms of the human thing, I think that Homo sapiens, maybe their time is to evolve now to the next level, but the behavior of the Homo sapiens has become more destructive than cohesive.
Thank you everyone for coming to be the listening for this story.